Welcome back to the program. Earlier on, I said we'll be speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, who is the fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I did introduce him a little earlier, but I wasn't hearing what he was saying. Mr. Oyedele, thank you for still staying with us. That's what technology could do sometimes. Thank you again. If you can hear me, please can you rehash what you mentioned earlier? I did ask you what you think. What are your thoughts concerning what has happened in the last few days? Then we take it from there. I apologize. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to hear you earlier.
Not a problem, Nancy. So what I was saying before is to just agree with you that the events of the past few days or weeks have been extremely confusing, unnecessarily so, because there's some level of confusion that you would understand because of circumstances, and maybe because you couldn't have done anything differently. But in this case, they were all, in my view, either due to incompetence or just people not thinking ahead in terms of what could go wrong, do different scenarios and plan effectively. And also to quickly communicate even when what's happening is not what you intended. You should communicate very quickly and communicate with clarity, with a coordinated approach or a single point of contact to the public. So we've had these confusion first, with the CBN itself in terms of what they're about to do, the circulars they issued, whether there should be a withdrawal limit or not, and then we have all the way to launching it, not providing the notes to the banks on time, whether you can get it across the counter or whether it has to be at the ATM, whether there's a limit to how much you can withdraw. Then you have the case at the Supreme Court. Then you have the CBN governor with the diplomats saying what they were going to do. And there's the president with the speech to the country. And then you also still have, even after that, people going to court, some governors saying, no, it continues in my state. And then you have, okay, go to the CBN if you have money to deposit. And then you appear at the CBN office, and then the CBN official said, and it was on video, they couldn't handle the number of people they saw. So, okay, go to your banks. And some banks even sent out, notice to their customers to say, you can come to us and deposit. And then the CBN officially disclaimed that in a public notice to say, we didn't ask you to go to any banks. And now we're hearing again, you can now go to banks. To be honest, completely unnecessary. It's too much confusion for a country like Nigeria. Given our level of development, we have smart people. We've done this before. We're not doing anything that is novel in the world. Many countries, if not all countries in the world, have done redesigning, redenomination, withdrawal limits, digitization, cashless economy. So we can learn from ourselves and also learn from the rest of the world rather than writing our story in a way that will become an example of bad reference in history, where other countries will say, if you want to redesign your currency or you want to do a cashless economy, these are the example of what not to do. That's not the place we want to be as a country. Unfortunately, it seems to be the story we are writing for ourselves.
Mm. That's actually, that's actually, I wouldn't want Nigeria to be part. If they're talking about the monetization models, India comes to mind, and the way Nigeria is going now, we might also be an example for that. But let me ask you this question, because many Nigerians are also of the view that, okay, the cashless policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria, which started in 2012, is not a bad policy in itself, but perhaps that of implementation. But I really want to ask you, can an economy really go without cash? So my question is, should it be less cash or cashless? Less cash in the economy or cashless?
The simple answer to that is it is impossible today, and in the very near future, I'm even talking about the next 10 years or longer, for any economy anywhere in the world to be completely cashless. It's impossible because you have to then think about bringing 100% of your people within the financial system. I think the highest we have in the world is Sweden at
Yeah,
98%.
Sweden.
So you don't
Yeah.
get 100%.
Mm-hmm.
The other aspect to this is that, to be honest, I think Nigeria is trying to solve a problem that is insignificant, or you can even say does not exist, right? What do I mean by that? So there's a confusion between cash, and one of the lawmakers said hard copy. There's a confusion between cash as hard copy and cash as soft copy, which is electronic payment, digital payment, or you can call it e-money if you want. So when I was looking at the data, and anybody can Google this and find out from very credible sources, right? You'll see that Nigeria is actually ranking as one of the best in the world. So we've tried to introduce the cashless economy, which is maybe they say is not to not have cash at all, but it's to have less cash. So cash less. Okay, so let's say I agree with that. We've actually made significant progress, more than many developed countries actually. So if you look at the percentage of hard cash, that's the printed money, currency in circulation, so GDP in Nigeria is under 2%. In fact, the latest report by the central bank says that currency is now about 3 trillion, and money supply, which is not only cash, but the deposits you have with bank, is the money you have in the money market, all those what you call cash equivalent is about 52 trillion naira. So even as a percentage of money supply, the cash component is less than 6%. So whether you're talking about America, in fact, you can even divide by the number of people in Nigeria. If you divide the currency in circulation by the number of Nigerians, you get something equivalent to about $34. If you did that for America, in fact, divide the amount of dollar notes in circulation by the world's population, not America's population, because US dollar is a global currency. By 8 billion people on earth, you're still going to get $280 per person. So multiple times more than Nigeria. Even India, that we said did demonetization in 2016, they currently have more than 10% of their GDP in currency note. Nigeria has only 1.8. Nigeria should be celebrating and telling the whole world to come and learn from us how we have been able to achieve that level of progress in a short period of time, despite more than 30% of our adults not within the banking system. That's a model we should be celebrating. Now, we're trying to solve a problem that does not exist. When you say Nigeria is a cash economy, which I think is what is confusing many people, is that the distinction between hard cash, physical cash, and e-money. If you want to buy a car today, and that car is worth 10 million naira, chances are that you have to save that money, and when the money is complete, you go and buy the car. You are not necessarily putting 10 million naira in Ghana must go and buy the car. You will do bank transfer, but we'll say that you bought the car in cash, and that's correct. As opposed to if you were living in the UK, US, or Canada, chances are that for a car of 10 million naira equivalent, you go there with 5% of the amount and you drive away with the car because there is credit, there is a vehicle finance, the same thing for mortgage. So what Nigeria does not have is that credit to be able to buy things and pay later. It does not mean that we are carrying physical cash up and down everywhere. So we are doing very well when it comes to digital economy adoption. I went to Banjul about 2 weeks ago, and this was a highbrow area. And I went to a store. I went to go and buy a SIM card from their largest telco operator. Everywhere I went, they said no card. They collected cash everywhere. Nigeria, even before this redenomination, or sorry, redesigning, you could pay almost everything online, except sometimes the services are not there or they are not reliable. So all in all, I think that we should have used data better to identify what the real problem is, which in my view is you have some cash in the wrong hands, politicians who have stolen money, bandits, kidnappers. Those are the issues we needed to address, and the approach would have been very different than punishing 200 million Nigerians, vast majority of who are, cannot even boast of 500,000 naira, in their bank account or at home altogether.
Okay. Mr. Oyedele, I understand what you've said, and I concur with you in terms of data. Thank you for bringing the example of Sweden, because Sweden is such a very good example of where the cashless policy happens, or where they even see very less cash. But if you take a look at what you've just said, that perhaps there was no need for Nigeria to embark on this kind of program because our payment system is well, people cite Nigeria as an example, a good payment system model. But the reasons that the central bank has given so far, which some of which you alluded to, like curbing, kidnapping, or for security measures and all of that, what are your recommendations in terms of how the central bank or the authorities would have gone about this? Because everyone is saying the implementation isn't good at this point. How do you think that the Central Bank of Nigeria would have handled this? And we're looking at it economically, because if you talk to different people on different divides, there's a legal angle to that, to what we're discussing. Okay, the president should have listened to the Supreme Court and all of that. But I don't want us to go into all of that. The focus for today is the economy, socio-economic implications. So what are your views about that?
Yeah, so my views about that very simple and straightforward. One, there should have been better planning. That planning will say what exactly is the problem we have that we're trying to address, right? And you have to be sincere with the people. Don't tell people it's A when what you have in mind is B. Once you start losing trust, you create a fertile ground for conspiracy theory, and people will fill in the gaps themselves, and it makes the public to behave differently, sometimes against your policy. So, and that proper planning also should have involved, which is still possible now, all the key stakeholders. It was surprising for many of us that even the finance minister wasn't aware. So involve relevant organs and agencies of government, including Ministry of Finance, including tax authorities. Almost every country where you've done something similar to this, tax is always a primary objective, if not the most important objective. Involve the financial intelligence unit in the planning, anti-graft agencies, right? Even in many countries, what I would have expected in Nigeria, even before then, issue what we call the unexplained wealth order. So this executive order will already have set out what will happen when you start bringing in the money and you cannot explain the source, right? Because you're really targeting those criminals with a lot of money. So that proper planning would also involve the infrastructure providers. The guys, the InterSwitch, the fintechs, the guys with mobile payments. The telecommunication. Do you have the bandwidth? So ask everybody to tell you what they need and how much time they need to get those things ready. You don't need to give them the money. They'll make the investment if they know you're going to come up with this policy. So in Kenya, for example, you have the M-Pesa. And I was in Kenya a few months ago, and I wanted to buy a book by the roadside, and the woman said I needed to pay with M-Pesa. So I had to go to, one of their telcos. I could open M-Pesa without a bank account, right? You don't need a bank account. You don't need a smartphone. And M-Pesa works so seamlessly. So when Kenya introduced their new constitution and said they don't want to see the face of anybody on their currency, they were replacing the old currency with faces of Kenyatta, I think it was, with the new ones. Nobody complained because they were like, actually, who needed the cash in the first place? It was seamless. So that proper planning should have happened. The next thing that we should have done differently is for the central bank to clearly define threshold. My view is that, based on even the NDIC report, that about 98% of bank accounts in Nigeria have 500,000 naira or less, right? Only about 2% of people who are within the banking system have more than 500,000. So I can say that cumulatively, any Nigerian can bring up to 500,000 naira in cash. We'll collect it. You want to withdraw it cumulatively, I'll allow you to withdraw 500,000. If it's now more than that amount, maybe up to 5 million, you make the process difficult by asking more questions, filling more forms, getting the tax authority involved, NFIU and the EFCC. If it's a lot more than 5 million, then you can come to the CBN, in which case you have to ask a lot of questions as well. We have to identify who you are and the source of the money. That way, you don't find 200,000 people showing up at the CBN office, because people have those kind of money. The people who want to go and buy votes and people who are kidnapping, they are not carrying 20,000 and 1,500,000 naira around. So you should have made it very easy for the most Nigerians with their legitimate hard-earned money to be able to go about their lives freely. And you should not withdraw 3 trillion from circulation and print 300 billion naira and just expect that everything will be fine. I also have my fundamental disagreement with the central bank saying that 80% of the currency in circulation is outside of the banking system. My question is, where do you expect the money to be? You printed currency and you want it to be within the banking system. What would the person in the village use to do transaction? The transporter, the vulcanizer, the tips that you give to security men greeting you happy weekend on Monday. So all those money you spend are not within the banking system. Currency is not supposed to be within the banking system. That's why it's notes. So the strategy should have been plan well, involve everyone, have scenarios to protect the poor people. So you can take out the excuse from politicians who are now going to court pretending that they are trying, in my view, pretending that they are trying to queue behind the masses. You should have taken that excuse away from them so we can really focus on what indeed is government's objective for this redesigning.
Okay, Mr. Oyedele, let me take you up on some of the few things you've talked about, and that is one that perhaps the central bank need to get engagement from all other agencies, like other parts of the federal government, like the Ministry of Finance. But of course, the central bank is not supervised by the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. The central bank is independent. It can issue currency. It is, the authority that issues the legal tender, and it seeks the approval from the central bank. I'm not the one saying it. It is there in the law that it is independent. And the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank of Nigeria, perhaps the Ministry of Trade and Investments, which other ministry, Budget and National Planning, and all of those ministries are responsible for handling the economy. Having said that, the second part, which you also mentioned, is if the central bank says that cash is out of the banking vault, don't you think that even if cash is out of the banking vault, in daily transactions, even if I spend 100 naira today and all of that, those monies should still find their ways back to the banking system, perhaps as even savings and all of that.
Yes,
For
let me start with
settlement
the first
purposes
question.
too.
Yes, independence of the central bank. You are right. The law, wants the CBN to be independent, but the CBN is not completely independent. That same Central Bank Act actually says that when it comes to, legal tender, like what we are doing now, which version will be legal tender, which one will be not, it says on the approval of the president. So the central bank cannot even do it on their own. They need the approval of the president. And once we say that the president must approve something, you would imagine it's not Mr. President himself alone. The president is the presidency is an office where before Mr. President will say yes or no, he's meant to consult. There are advisors, there are technical people, there are economists, right? You should consult. You should not just sit down, Mr. President, with CBN governor, you conclude and say you're okay to go. You find this kind of chaos. So we are not taking away the independence of the central bank. And we're not saying that the central bank is subject to the Ministry of Finance. No, it's not done anywhere. It shouldn't be done. The central bank needs to have its own autonomy. But it takes nothing away from the central bank. After all, the central bank is a member of the National Economic Council, right? So it doesn't take anything away from you to say, as part of what I'm planning to do, it will affect A, to affect B and C and D. Let's come together and talk. It doesn't mean you are no longer, even me, if I'm going out, I'll tell my driver I'm going out. Does it mean that I'm not independent? Right? So it's just communication for you to get the best outcome from what you're trying to do. And that's my view. I still insist that the central bank would get better outcome if they properly engage and consult. Now, so the other aspect of the question in terms of, at the end of the day, the money is outside of the banking system. Isn't that a problem? The simple analogy I'll give is if you buy vehicles today, to do, Uber or Bolt business, right? And you're wondering why the vehicles are not in the garage. I'll say, well, the whole essence is you don't make money by being in the garage. You make money from being outside. There's the velocity of money, which means that money is meant to circulate and go round and round, change hands many times. Once in a while, your vehicle for Uber will show up at the garage to come and sleep and then wake up and go back, right? So the same thing with money. So it goes around in circulation. Once in a while, it comes to the banking system, it leaves and go back again. So the central bank said about 500 billion is within the banking system. That seems very reasonable to me. Out of 3 trillion, you have about 2.5 trillion that is outside in different hands. They will come in and leave, or on the average, 500 billion is within the banking system. Isn't that sufficient? You would never get everything to be within the banking system, which is why I'm of the view that we're trying to solve a problem that does not exist in the first place. So if you get to a point where you have these 200 million people and you have only 2.5 trillion, in the hands of people outside of the banking system, given that we have villages and even local governments without even a branch of a bank, not even a single one, right? And then you have money supply of 52 trillion naira. You should not be asking God for anything better than that. We should actually commend Nigerians for that level of progress, despite the challenges we have with infrastructure around e-payments, around financial inclusion, and the large population of poor people, uneducated, without access to financial services.
Mr. Oyedele, as a financial consultant, what has been your advice to people in the last few days vis-a-vis the kind of orders that we've had from different quarters? The Supreme Court saying, let's hold it because there are cases before it right now. The president's speech just a few days ago, if we have the highlights of it, we can take that on the screen. And after the president spoke, you also saw some governors coming out to tell their state indigents that the old notes still remain valid. We also seen on social media, for instance, allegedly, that some politicians, or there's a state going on right now, seemingly buying votes just a few days to the elections when you see, I think I saw 5,000 naira or so in, in envelopes given to people. So, okay, that's the video there. And people, just a few days to the elections, you can see that on the screen. I've even lost what I want to say now because this is really, this is really, it's really sad. Can we put on volume for that so that we can hear what they're saying, really? Okay. There seems not to be volume, but what you can see there, what I'm driving at really, is that those are old notes, but the state governors are saying, spend those old notes. They've told their citizens or they've told their indigents, spend those old notes. What those women were asking in that video is that, can we really spend it? And I wish we had audio to it. And the person that was speaking to them was saying, oh, you can spend it, you can spend it, you can go ahead and spend it. So how do you interpret all of this? And what is your financial advice? Because people are confused at this time. What should I do? Should I hold the old notes because my state governor has spoken and the Supreme Court has spoken? Or should I discard the old notes, get new ones because the president has spoken? So where do we stand?
Yeah, good question. By the way, my view is about vote buying. I think that even this strategy can make it easier for politicians to buy the votes, right? So give them the assurance that the old note is still valid, and then give them the money. So you're actually buying the votes in advance. The votes in about we are voting in about 5 days' time. So you give them money now and ask them to vote for you on Saturday, maybe even on March 11th. So, and who says that you have to buy votes with cash? If you have arrangements with sellers of rice, beans, gari, or even airtime, You can use that to induce. Inducing voters doesn't have to be cash. Maybe cash is the easiest, and some people might even have enough money to even give dollars or other currency. So I think the way we've gone about it in itself is even counterproductive for what seemed to be the political objective for the redesign of the naira. But having said that, to your main question about what advice do I give people, for me it's very simple. So if you have legitimate source of cash, right? So because you're going to have illegitimate sources of cash, somebody has given you the money they have stolen to go and change it. I don't have any advice for you. You should suffer the consequences. But if you have legitimate source of cash, which means the vast majority of people that fall into this category will have small amounts of money. Some of them is 10,000 naira, is 15,000, is 2,500. Some of them are doing small businesses. They collect a little sum of money from people on a daily basis. If your source of money is legitimate, I'll say that my view is that you cannot lose that money. Even the CBN themselves have acknowledged that in line with, I think, Section 20 of the CBN Act. It's only the headache of getting that money to the central bank to collect new notes. That is what you need to think about. And that's where I then advise that the position you take has to be practical for you. If you expect that the whole money you'll be able to get, that you have in old currency is 5,000 naira, the stress of finding the CBN office, if they insist there has to be CBN office and waiting, filling some form may not be worthwhile. But if you are doing business and the amount of naira notes you have from your small business is 500,000 or maybe even 1 million, I'll say by all means, keep those, naira notes, and you have the opportunity to change them later on or put them in your bank account and get value for that money. We're even beginning to see some of the leading candidates now, presidential candidates, using this as a campaign strategy to say, you just need to vote for me and you never lose your money. When I become president, I'll make sure that you get your money no matter how long it takes, right? And then if what you have is small money, I'll say, go and deposit it. If you cannot, if you need the money urgently, or if you are doing small business, find the opportunity now to move to digital platform. There are many of the banks. I know that it's difficult sometimes to transfer and you don't get the credit after days, but I think those are temporary problems. So use the opportunity now to move your business to online platform for payments, using payment card, using different infrastructure. And in the meantime, in my view, if you think that you can deal with the stress of replacing your old currency, I'll say collect them. If you cannot, then don't collect them. Because either way, whether you want to collect it, there's no reason for you to support yourself, including the Supreme Court judgment and the CBN Act. If you don't want to collect it, there's enough basis to say that, including the presidential statement from Mr. President himself and the CBN. Whatever option works for you and is practical, please do it.
Quite interesting. Whatever option works for you, just do it. But if we take a look at the president's speech again, do you think that that is enough? Do you think that Nigerians have gotten enough assurance from the president that old naira notes, the 200 naira notes, should be valid till April 10? And data also supports that 200 naira in terms that, and what you actually also said earlier, in terms of 98% of Nigerians do not have up to $500,000 in their account, and that data also was from the NDIC. So what do you have to say about that, just opposing all what has happened? And it also depends on who you're speaking with, because if you're speaking with the legal folks, they would say that the president was dictatorial by not listening to the Supreme Court. So what do you have to say about that, Mr. Oyedele, before I let you go?
Yes, I do think that, the 200 naira old notes that the president said will continue to be legal tender and circulate, I think, until April 10, is a partial relief. But in terms of how much, 200 naira old note do we have, assuming none of it has been destroyed, it's less than 300 billion. So I think it's about 220 billion. So it won't solve the problem, because the problem we have now is in trillion. In my view, I think we need at least 1 to 1.5 trillion naira to even is the situation where we find ourselves. Because if we had implemented this properly, the amount of currency we will need would even be less. We have ended up in a situation now that people who have cash don't want to spend it. And that includes me. I had about 20,000 naira of the new notes for about 3 weeks. I've only spent 8,000 naira out of it. I still have 12,000 naira of it that I'm not spending. So before I even spend, any amount now in cash, it has to be that I have no other option. And that in itself is affecting, economic activities, and people who are suffering the most are the poorest people who sell tomatoes. I was listening to this interview on TV a few days ago about mile 12. This guy sells, if you're selling tomato and you refuse to collect the currency that they bring, the tomato will spoil, you lose the money. So why don't you just collect whatever currency they bring and hope that you can change that later because the currency will not spoil, right? So 200 naira was a small palliative. Uh, it doesn't solve the problem completely. Government needs to go beyond that. The words and the speech of the president was helpful, but not enough. It needs to go further than that. You need to acknowledge, not even acknowledge that this is a real problem that ordinary people are going through itself. It's insensitive. And then you find two examples of banks where you found money in their vaults and you say they are the reason for the problem. I was disappointed that even the president was blaming banks. When you start blaming banks, they're going to set them against the public, and you see the crisis of burning branches and ATM branch, machines. It's not good because whatever the banks are doing wrong, government can deal with them. They're not like so many, right? They can deal with them without asking for public sympathy. They can always handle banks as they deem fit. And in my view, I think it's part of banking business to always have cash. They're not supposed to have a cashless bank where they have no notes, right? So whether it's 200 new notes, whether it's 200 old notes, and the 150, 20 that were not even redesigned, and whatever it is that you have in the newly printed 500 and 1,000, make it available enough for people who are doing legitimate services, legitimate transactions to have access to them, and create limits that make it difficult for these politicians and kidnappers and bandits not to be able to exchange their money easily. That would be my view in terms of the way forward.
Okay, just the last one in a few seconds. Do you even see any gain coming out of this? Because just a few days ago, I was told that some small scale traders now have POS machines with them. Do you see this perhaps in the long run that it would enthrone more financial inclusion and more electronic payments, or Nigerians, settling with electronic payment channels? What do you think?
The answer is yes. Electronic payment, financial inclusion has a lot of advantages. So when you do e-payment instead of cash payments, it helps with financial inclusion. Even imagine small businesses, they'll have track record of their businesses. It can give them access to credit. The reason why many of them can't even borrow to expand their business is they have no record because they are unable to keep record and they can't afford accountant. But if you are doing e-payments, all that you just need is your bank statement, and I can create a financial statement for you to be able to borrow and expand your business. The cost of transaction should go down normally because it costs money to move money around. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, you see even more charges when you do e-payment, which is an abnormality, right? And even for government themselves, it costs a lot of money to print those notes. So the less of them you have to print, the better for the country because you save on money. And you also find that the risk of theft or armed robbers stopping you when you're trying to buy your good and do your transaction is less. And criminal tendencies will be less because if you have to then buy a house, or you want to collect a bribe and you can't get the physical cash and they transfer the money, God help you because you can be tracked and punished and prosecuted. To be honest, the benefits are immense. The only question is this the only way to do it? Can it be done differently where it does not bring so much pain while still retaining the benefit? Because the risk now is some people have said that while we are trying to bank the unbanked, we actually now risk unbanking the bank because they no longer trust the money at bank because they can't have access to it. Maybe they now want to just keep their cash at home. We may have to deal with these issues at least in the short to medium term.
Mm. Thank you very much, Mr. Oyedele. I have to let you go at this point. You know, it also depends on who you're listening to at this point, or which side of the divide that you are. But I must tell you, even I as a person, what I have noticed that this has done for me, it has curtailed my spending, my spending habits, you know, because the little cash that I have now, I'm just like trying to hold on to it and not, you know, I get to spend it except if I really need to spend cash. So thank you very much for your insights today on the program. Thank you. I've been speaking with
Thank you for having me.
I've been speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, who is the fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader at Price Waterhouse Coopers. That's it for today's edition of the program. Nigeria Votes 2023, just 5 days to the elections. I hope you have your PVC, and I hope you all are going to come out on February 25 and March 11. Like I said at the beginning of the program, we are not only seeking for the next CEO of Nigeria PLC come February 25, we are seeking for people that can do the work across board. So you should be interested in your National Assembly members. You should be interested in who is going to be the next governor of your state and the states where you reside too, as well as state assemblies. I'll see you all again tomorrow, God willing. Be the best you can be. And what a change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.